Welcome back to Hale and Hearty Horses. So today we're going to talk about the 10 ways to make sure you're not chasing symptoms in your horse. Hi, I'm Dr. Rebecca, and I've been doing Chinese and integrative medicine on horses and humans for over 22 years. So sometimes you can feel like you're doing all the right things for your horse, but the results never really hold, and they just can't seem to get anywhere. You do something, and then it's just this recurring pattern. And there's a good chance that the problem isn't in your effort. It's the way the problem's being understood. And this is the number one thing I see in my practice and the hardest to shift in the mindset of horse owners. And this is exactly what we're going to talk about today. So today we're talking about the ways to make sure that you aren't just chasing symptoms when it comes to your horse's health problems. And so let me tell you what symptom chasing looks like. So it basically is like you're going to treat the thing that's the loudest, the most obvious, or the most urgent, but you never get far enough upstream to really understand why that pattern keeps showing up, or how it even developed in the first place. So you never quite get far enough. And sometimes you have to go after that symptom because maybe it's something really serious. But then that means we have to come back later or even during the treatment for the symptom and figure out the deeper meaning of what's going on. So here's 10 ways to check yourself, shift your mindset, and get better results and a better understanding of horse health in general. So number 1, you're changing treatments, but you're not changing how you're thinking. This is one of the biggest traps. You are switching from maybe one supplement to another, one therapy to another, one even professional to another. But underneath of it, the question is still the same. And what do I give for this? And fill in the blank. And so you're really looking for this one-off approach of like, okay, well, my horse has this, I give this, and it goes away. And this is symptom chasing, even if the tool is natural, even if you say, well, I'm going to use herbs for this, or even if the treatment is integrative. It's still the thinking that this symptom goes away. That means I fix the problem. And so the approach has not really changed. Number 2 is you're focused on the loudest symptoms. So sometimes the loudest symptom is what gets your attention, right? Your horse comes up lame, or they get scoped and you find out they have ulcers, or they're spooking more, they have anxiety, or maybe they have digestive upset with diarrhea, or maybe they're just generally stiff, or their top line's not developing. But the loud does not always mean that that's the primary problem. Sometimes the loud symptom is the compensation. Sometimes it's the downstream effect. And sometimes it's a place where the body just finally ran out of options, so it could no longer compensate, and so that's where it showed up. For instance, with foot pain, of course, there's a bunch of different reasons for foot pain, but there are at least 10 upstream reasons for that even developing. And those wanting a quick answer will struggle with long-term soundness because they'll just be going after the foot pain. And as we know with say a metabolic condition that is creating a laminitic type of episode, you can't just go after the laminitis. You have to go after the metabolic reason of why it's happening. And the same you can see with ulcers as well. So you have to ask, is this the problem? Or is this where the problem is actually showing itself? Number 3 is you're expecting one thing to fix it. And we kind of talked about this a little bit in number 1. So you're looking at one supplement, one adjustment to the diet, or one adjustment to the training, or one adjustment to the turnout, one ulcer treatment, one saddle change, or one bodywork session. And that may help. It may even help a lot. But complex health patterns usually do not resolve because one thing was added. They resolve when the right priorities are identified and the system is supported in the right order. And sometimes that can be pretty complicated and not just an easy fix right away. And the one thing that helps temporarily, that is super useful information, but it doesn't automatically mean that you found the whole answer or even the right answer. It just means you found part of the right answer. Number 4 is you're not asking what else is happening at the same time. The body doesn't separate. We know now that everything's connected. That's what integrative and holistic medicine is all about. So the body doesn't separate digestion, movement, the nervous system, immunity, hormones, or behavior into these little neat boxes. Those systems are talking to each other all day long, and they realistically rely on one another. So if your horse has ulcers, you also need to ask about stress, maybe workload. What's their forage like? What's their pain like? What about movement and turnout and their nervous system regulation and their behavior? If your horse is spooky, you also need to ask about pain. Maybe it's their vision or gut health, or it's the training pressure. Maybe they need some recovery time. And maybe their nervous system is just fried. The symptom is one doorway. It is not the whole house. That's what's really important, is to stop us from symptom chasing. We kind of have to look at it as feedback, but not the whole house. So number 5 is you see temporary improvement and you assume you found the answer. So say you get some body work done and the horse gets a little bit better. So you think, okay, we got this. It's a body work thing. It's maybe their fascia restrictions. But the problem is this one gets people in trouble because the temporary improvement can be very convincing. It can make you think you're on the right track. The horse looks better, maybe the behavior improves, the soreness decreases, or the gut settles down. But if the pattern comes back as soon as the treatment stops, or maybe the seasons change, or the workload increases, or the horse gets stressed, then you have to ask a deeper question. Because then you're wondering, did I really resolve the driver or the cause of this? Or did I just notice a reduce in pressure on a system for a little while, but I didn't really get to the true root cause? Number 6 is you're not looking at patterns over time. This is where people miss so much because they're not looking at all of these things that we're trained in holistic medicine. Like in Chinese medicine, we take this really in-depth history of everything about the problem. And it's because we're looking for those patterns. Because like I've talked about so many times, 2 horses can have the same symptom, but it come from a completely different pattern. And if you treat them the same, it won't work. And so you want to look at, like, when does it get worse? Maybe after rain or during the heat or in the heat. Maybe it's springtime, or maybe it's during training increases, like when you're really ramping it up for a show. Or maybe it's after vaccinations, or when you get a new hay shipment in, or when they get a new herd mate, or you switch fields. Maybe it's after travel or after farrier work. Patterns over time are not background information. They're actually like this trail of breadcrumbs. And if you're only looking at the symptom on the day it appears, and you're not looking around for what's going with it, you're probably missing the story that really led up to that symptom. So number 7 is you're treating based on diagnosis, not presentation. So diagnosis totally matters. I'm not saying that it doesn't. But a diagnosis of ulcers or Lyme or EPM or laminitis or arthritis or kissing spine does not tell you the whole pattern. It doesn't tell you why it developed in that particular horse. So like I've said before, 2 horses can have the same diagnosis and need completely different support because their bodies are not expressing that diagnosis the same way. One horse might be depleted, another may be inflamed, one might be really tense and reactive, and another might be dull, weak, and shut down, but have the same symptom. And that label tells you what was found. That diagnosis is like, well, this is what we found. But it really doesn't tell you the individual pattern in that horse. But the presentation is going to tell you, those patterns, they're going to tell you how the horse is functioning. And a lot of times, it sounds kind of simple, but if you go after these foundations of health, a lot of times you can start disrupting these symptoms. And it's not because, oh, well, I gave them this one mineral, but it's when you go after the foundations of health. And we talked about this on my website, which is nourishment, regulation, which has to do with the nervous system, movement, and resilience. And they're just different lenses to look at the horse's overall health. And a lot of times when you iron them out, a lot of these things go away. But they also train you to understand the presentation and the different patterns and how they come up in horses. Number 8, you're ignoring how the horse is moving and organizing its body. So sometimes we think of movement as separate from health, but it's all related. A horse that can't organize its body well is often using compensation to get through the work of turnout or even just basic posture. And those compensations affect the fascia, they affect joints, they affect all the soft tissue, circulation, even breathing, digestion, and the nervous system. So if you have a horse that's bracing, guarding, rushing, maybe dragging a toe, maybe leaning in on one side, is hollowing or struggling to coordinate, that's not just a training issue, and it's really not just a tissue issue either, because that information affects the whole system. And that's something to keep in mind because we have a tendency to sort of separate out physical movement from other organ or nervous system or even pain-related issues, how they can affect different parts of the body. And one of the most obvious examples of this is how pain, even low-grade pain over a long period of time, can give a horse ulcers. So number 9, let's move on to the next one, is you're not factoring in the nervous system. If a horse can't regulate, then the body has a harder time healing. And we know this from mindfulness practice. We know this from the connection of cortisol and how it can wreak havoc in the body. So a horse living in a constant state of vigilance, tension or shutdown, or just reactivity in general is not the same physiological state as a horse that can recover or settle or digest, learn, and adapt. They just can't do it. And this could be a whole entire podcast on its own. But this is why we can't separate behavior from health. We can't just say, oh, this horse has a training problem or, oh, this horse has a behavioral problem. It doesn't work that way because spooking, anxiety, any sort of resistance, even dullness. So you go the opposite. You have some horse that's really dull and really lazy, or you can have the horse that's explosive and have these really unhinged reactions. Or it could just be the inability to come back down after excitement. We all have the horse that we call adrenaline junkies because once they get up, it's really hard to get them to come back down. And they're going to be telling you something about the nervous system, about the nervous system's capacity to handle life, and not just about the training. And this is going to give you just more information about the pattern and what's the cause and what's driving your horse's health issues. And finally, number 10, you're going to always feel like if you are just chasing symptoms, you're going to always feel like you're reacting to what's going on. Instead of having this deep understanding of what's going on, you're always reacting to something. Your horse is always having the next thing. And this is a really big one because not only are you always reacting to what the horse does, but it keeps you on this path of constantly trying the next thing, trying the next professional, trying to get a professional in there that can give you finally the secret. And sometimes you look at that in a supplement. Oh, this was the secret, or the next protocol. Oh, that protocol. And you'll see this a lot of times because You'll have a horse do better on a protocol or on a supplement or on a herbal formula in the barn. And then the next thing you know, every horse in the barn is on it. And so we can't look at this as the next product or the next professional. And every time something doesn't hold, like every time you try something and maybe it's a little bit better or it's no better or it doesn't hold and you jump to the next thing, you feel like you're back at the beginning. And that feeling is a sign that you don't need more just random information of like, oh, this herb's good for this. But you need a better framework, because symptom chasing, it's not always about doing the wrong things. A lot of times people are doing reasonable things. And yeah, sometimes it takes trying things to discover what's going on. But a lot of times they're just doing them without the understanding of how everything fits together. And a perfect example is like, well, so-and-so's horse had a dull coat and she added this supplement and now the horse looks amazing. So you do it with your horse and it doesn't work, right? Because it's so superficial. It's just a symptom. That dull coat is just a symptom. It's not really giving you the real reason of why that horse has a dull coat. So until you can see the pattern, you will keep cycling through these solutions that only address pieces. I think this is one of the strength of holistic medicine. And it's so hard even for veterinarians that were trained in Western medicine, and then they try and incorporate acupuncture because they're like, ooh, what's the acupuncture points for ulcers? What's the acupuncture points for the horse bleeding? I remember this vet who had recently come out of the program that most vets go through at the Chi Institute, and she was talking about this horse that was one of her clients that was bleeding, which is common in the lung tissue with racehorses and such because of overexertion, but there's other reasons for it. And she had no clue of the 5 reasons that there's bleeding in the body, according to Chinese medicine. And that matters. Let's just take 2. You could have a qi deficiency where the body's not able to hold the blood in the blood vessels, or you could have a heat, which then creates it escaping out of the blood vessels. And these terms, don't get hung up on these terms. These terms I've talked about before are about pattern differentiation, and the Chinese use language that was very applicable at their time. Now we have the chemistry and we have the research behind to actually know what the acupuncture point or what the herb is doing, right? But back then, they just knew that it worked, and so they had to come up with a framework of why it worked, and so their language seems really foreign to us. But if you learn it and just go with it, it completely works and it completely makes sense. But as an outsider looking in, you're going to be like, what? That makes no sense. But she had no clue of that, and that's what makes the difference in holistic medicine, is understanding that there is maybe 5 reasons for this symptom. And then you have to figure out, what pattern does that horse fit in? And that's when you can start seeing success. And I'm not saying it's always easy. I mean, that we are so wed to easy. And I always say it's like, I order something on Amazon, I get it the next day, right? That's what we want now. And we want to get on the internet and Google it and find the answer. So I'm not saying it's always easy. And it really is, you have to look at these patterns. You have to look at the differentiation. You have to go after the root cause, or otherwise you just keep chasing symptoms. And that's the framework that I'm talking about, because symptom chasing, it doesn't mean that you're not going to stumble across something or you're not going to do something right, but it doesn't mean that you're going to understand how it all fit together and be able to repeat it or be able to understand the next thing that goes on. So until you actually see the pattern, you're just going to keep cycling through these random solutions. And really, the goal is not to treat every symptom separately, but is to look at it in the overall picture of the individual horse. So a lot of times when people ask me, oh, Rebecca, what do you recommend for this? And I'm like, well, it depends. And they don't like that answer, but it depends. Is the horse really energetic, or is the horse really dull? Does the horse have a good appetite, or does the horse walk away from its feed? Like, all of that matters. All of that matters. So the goal really for holistic medicine is to understand what the horse's body is trying to tell you, what pattern is driving the problem, what's the cause, Or what's the multiple causes? Sometimes it's multiple causes. And what has to change so the improvement can actually hold? And that's where I say start at the foundations, and then we go from there, because obviously if the foundations aren't okay, you've got a foundation that's crumbling and you're trying to build a house on top of it. So this is all what we do in the Hale and Hearty Horse Collective. This kind of information is exactly why I formed this platform. So if you want to learn more and you want to work with me in this way, you need to come join me in the Hale and Hearty Horse Collective, because this is where we're going to really start unpacking this kind of information. Okay, guys, that's it for today. I'll see you next time.